Greetings, Frodo.
Gandalf, it's really you. Oh, it's been so long.
9 brilliant satirical rotoscopic animated movies by Ralph Bakshi, the fearless artist. How can one even begin to describe Ralph Bakshi? From being an animation rebel to a fearless trailblazer, this underrated master of animation here not only gave a new definition to modern animation, but also revolutionized the medium in films with his outstanding body of work.
Mother of God!
Bakshi, who actually began his career as a cel polisher working at the Terrytoons television studio, ended up being a recipient of a number of prestigious awards that includes the 1980 Golden Gryphon for The Lord of the Rings at the Giffoni International Film Festival, the 1988 Annie Award for Distinguished Contribution to the Art of Animation, and the 2003 Maverick Tribute Award at the Cinequest Film Creativity Festival. While it is true that his contentious, bold, envelope-pushing oeuvre did attract a lot of people not appreciating his opus, Bakshi simply did not let any of that affect him from generating some of the most spectacular stuff on screen. One of his most famous and extensively used animation tricks happens to be rotoscopy, a technique in which the scenes are first shot in live action and then traced into animation cels. So you will be quite surprised to know the main reason behind him resorting to this animation technique. Apparently, 20th Century Fox denied Bakshi's request for a $50,000 budget increase, something that was primarily essential to finish his 1977 animated flick Wizards. This actually drove him to make use of rotoscopy, and voila! That's how he took care of the unfinished war scenes. Of course, he nailed it! Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about 9 brilliant, satirical, rotoscopic animated movies of Ralph Bakshi, the iconoclast of animation. Before we go into our list, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click from you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Let's begin.
Freeze, asshole. Cool World Police.
Cool World, 1992. Guilty of killing a man he found in bed with his wife, cartoonist Jack Deebs has been serving a prison sentence of 10 years. But during his time there, he has visions of an alternate universe known as the Cool World and a femme fatale character that goes by the name Holly. All of this inspires him to create a comic series, and he does so while spending his sentence. However, shortly after he gets released, Jack gets transported into the Cool World as a part of a scheme by Holly, who has plans of seducing him and turning herself into a human.
Made of ink, but I'm no dream.
Frank Harris, on the other hand, is a detective and also the only other human being in Cool World, who confronts Jack, telling him that the alternate dimension existed way before Jack even created the comic series. He also warns the cartoonist about the forbidden law, that noids, as in humans, are not supposed to indulge in any form of sexual activity with the Doodles, who are basically the cartoon characters of the Cool World. Nevertheless, Jack ends up breaking the law with Holly, and the latter transforms into a noid, disrupting the balance between both the worlds. Holly, who has plans of her own, will do anything it takes to retain her noid form forever. With a flamboyant blend of animation and live-action sequences, Ralph Bakshi whips up literally the hottest action around with his 1992 live-action animated black comedy fantasy flick Cool World. The compelling narrative by Michael Grace and Mark Victor was highly praised for his originality, thereby appealing to a large section of enthusiastic, devoted movie fans in due course. The movie bears a striking resemblance to a lot of Bakshi's characteristic traits. It is creative, it is interesting, and most importantly, it is fearless. Boasting a running time of 102 minutes, the movie moves at a pretty rapid pace, shifting tones from slapstick to erotic to sad, but not even once does it lose your attention. The whole idea of real people colliding with cartoons is an interesting concept to begin with, and with Bakshi as the director, you know what you're dealing with. It is a cult classic anyway. Bakshi's unconventional take on the old animation genre, leading his audience to a spectacular work of animation on display, needs a definite mention. Conceptual designer Barry Jackson's background designs and paintings are impressive, and Mark Isham's background score acts more like the cherry on the cake. Last but not least, Bakshi is the real deal here. The fact that he is irrefutably a creative genius simply shows in the movie, and you just cannot miss out on his psychedelic visual sequences. There is no reason to not watch this underrated gem here, especially if you're Team Bakshi. Fire and Ice, 1983. The wicked queen Juliana and her son Necron release a wave of glaciers from their fortress Ice Peak, coercing the people to evacuate and move towards the equator. Next, Necron consigns a delegation to King Geralt in his volcanic castle, Firekeep, requesting him to surrender. However, all this was done as a part of a ruse set up by the evil queen so that her subhuman troops can kidnap the beautiful daughter of Geralt, Princess Tigra, and eventually get her married to Necron to give them an heir. Meanwhile, Tigra manages to escape and encounters a young warrior called Larn, who happens to be the lone survivor of a village that was destroyed by the glaciers. The duo grows close, and Larn offers to escort Tigra back to Firekeep. But the princess gets captured and is taken to Ice Peak, and although Necron refuses to marry her, he keeps her as a hostage. Larn, while looking for Tigra, comes across a mysterious masked warrior called Darkwolf, and the duo teams up to not only save the princess, but also stop the queen and her son from conquering the world.
Big tree. You go get her out, and I'll distract the others.
It would not be wrong to come to the conclusion that this 1983 animated epic dark fantasy adventure flick of Bakshi has aged just like fine wine. It goes without saying that the director did go to greater lengths using the rotoscoping technique in order to achieve that perfect, realistic movement in the animated characters. Fire and Ice is said to be shot with live actors in black and white, and rotoscoped with animation cells actually placed over every frame of the cast members to generate a much more fluid and naturalistic animation.
Do the living disturb the sleep of the dead?
The film literally boasts over 1,000 brush-stroked background paintings that were precisely done for this movie, and full credits to artists Thomas Kincaid and James Gurney for their impeccable work here. While the dialogue and the characters are kept simple, what truly makes this movie work is the design, the action, and the work of animation on display. With a screenplay by Gary Conway and Roy Thomas, the movie is dramatic, romantic, passionate, violent, in short, epic, and definitely does not deserve to be forgotten. So, if you're someone who fancies the fantasy genre and love all things Bakshi and animation, this one is certainly for you. Wizards, 1977. In a post-apocalyptic Earth, the human race has been wiped out, and the true ancestors of humanity, namely the fairies, elves, and the dwarves, have resurfaced and repopulated the planet. When Delia, the queen of fairies, gives birth to twin wizards, Avatar turns out to be good and kind-hearted, while his mutated brother Black Wolf turns out to be aggressively evil. Black Wolf, post being defeated in a battle against his brother, leaves the idyllic land of Montagar and vows to come back to take his revenge. 3,000 years later, Black Wolf has emerged and leads the dark wasteland of Scorch. He, along with his army of goblins, ogres, wraiths, demons, dragons, and mutants, have also been restoring ancient technology, and soon sets out to get his vengeance on the New World and destroy his brother. Avatar, on the other hand, also sets out to the dark land of Scorch, accompanied by Weehawk the elf warrior, Eleanor the fiery young fairy princess, and Peace the robotic assassin who was initially sent by Black Wolf to kill all believers in magic. The brothers are eventually led to the ultimate battle of good versus evil, and it is up to them to decide the fate of the New World.
In its destruction. Go now, the both of you, and prepare.
This 1977 animated post-apocalyptic science fantasy flick by Bakshi happens to be an exciting blend of fantasy visuals and his standard acuity. As the director, producer, and writer of Wizards, Bakshi actually did storyboards for every last shot in this film, and even went to the extent of being the voice of 3 different characters in the movie: Fritz, Lardbottom, and Stormtrooper.
Killed Fritz! They've killed Fritz!
Those lousy stinking yellow...
This underrated gem here has on display quite the surreal and creative animation, and with Andrew Belling's mystical background score, it takes you to a whole new world, leaving you absolutely awestruck. The climax of the film, especially the rotoscope battle scene, is intense. It is easily one of the coolest animated wars that one has ever seen. British illustrator Ian Miller was particularly brought all the way from England to work on the illustrated backgrounds of Scorch and the Flick. This movie is an absolute classic, and there's no denying that. You deserve to indulge yourself in this illustrative retro future fashion film, one that is packed with trippy psychedelic animation, a lot of unforgettable characters, and a delightful journey. The Lord of the Rings, 1978. Sometime early in the Second Age of Middle-earth, elven smiths created 9 rings of power for the humans, 7 for the dwarf lords, and 3 for the elf kings. Shortly afterwards, the Dark Lord Sauron makes the Ruling Ring, also known as the One Ring, in the hopes of ruling them all post-learning the secrets of how to create them from the Elves of Holland. Prince Isildur manages to defeat Sauron and takes the ring, but he loses it and gets killed by the orcs. This results in the ring lying at the bottom of the Anduin River for more than 2,500 years. Over a period of time, Sauron is successful in capturing the 9 rings and ends up converting their possessors into the ring wraiths. As for the One Ring, it's found by Deagle, but his kinsman Smeagol slays him and steals the ring for himself. The ring distorts Smeagol into the hideous creature Gollum, and he wanders with it to a cave in the Misty Mountains. About 100 years later, Bilbo comes across the ring inside Gollum's cave and brings it back with him to the Shire. Many years later, during Bilbo's birthday celebrations, the wizard Gandalf tells him to leave the ring to his nephew Frodo, to which Bilbo agrees.
17 years passed sleepily in the Shire.
17 years later, upon learning that the evil forces have found out that a certain Baggins is in possession of the ring, Gandalf tells Frodo the history of the ring and the threat that it poses. Frodo is eventually given the task of destroying the One Ring, and he is accompanied by 3 hobbits, Pippin, Merry, and Sam, along with Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, Legolas, and Gimli the dwarf. What follows is a thrilling yet perilous journey, one that's filled with incredible adventures. Way before Peter Jackson took us on an epic fantasy thrill ride with his version of The Lord of the Rings, it was Ralph Bakshi who had decided to give J.R.R. Tolkien's high fantasy novel, also called The Lord of the Rings, an animated spin. It goes without saying that Bakshi's 1978 animated dark fantasy adventure flick not only managed to capture the real essence of Tolkien's brilliant work, but the film also turned out to be a cult classic eventually. In fact, this movie was the first fully rotoscoped animated feature. To provide a sense of realism, especially for the battle scenes, Bakshi used live-action footage of actors dressed as orcs, the Nazgul, even the human characters, and then rotoscoped it to fit in with the animation. Remember Sergei Eisenstein's 1938 Soviet historical drama film Alexander Nevsky? Well, Bakshi ended up using the war footage of the film for some of his rotoscoped animated scenes. Coming back to the movie here, Bakshi created an entirely new, fresh form of form. He literally manages to bring the subtleness of Middle-earth to life in a rather dark and mysterious way, something that traditional animation, or even live action for that matter, could not have done. Then comes the brilliant orchestral score by Leonard Rosenman, which was nothing less than a symphonic perfection, along with Timothy Galfus's notable work of cinematography. No wonder the movie ended up winning the Golden Gryphon Award at the 1980 Giffoni Film Festival.
Bored. They just sit there and take bennies and stay up all night with their face stuck in a bunch of books and their thumb up.
Fritz the Cat, 1972. Say hello to the one that actually started it all. Bakshi marked his directorial debut with this 1972 adult animated black comedy film. Based on cartoonist R. Crumb's comic strip, also titled Fritz the Cat, the story is set in the 60s in a super city, one that's filled with anthropomorphic animals. The narrative revolves around Fritz, a feline college student in New York City who uses intellectual buzzwords and hippie fashion to get access to easy sex and drugs.
yes. Together we shall all learn the real existential essence.
He decides to drop out of college on a whim, unintentionally begins a race riot, and also becomes a leftist revolutionary, all while exploring the epitomes of hedonism and socio-political awareness. Very few movies have been able to capture the raw, gritty essence of New York City back in the 60s. This brings us to Bakshi, who simply left no stone unturned to expose that particular era with Fritz the Cat. The movie features a lot of allegorical symbolism, and only if you pay close attention you will realize what a genius Bakshi is. The animation on display is extremely effective. A plethora of styles were used, each according to the mood of the scene and sure to charm you. Add to it the background score by Ed Bogus and Ray Shanklin, and you are in for a treat. Mind you, this is not a film for everyone. It can be quite offensive to a lot of people and even vulgar to some. It is X-rated, which makes Fritz the Cat the first animated flick to receive such a rating from the Motion Picture Association of America. If you are wondering why, well, the movie does feature full frontal nudity of cartoon animals indulging in some rather explicit sexual acts. But then again, we are talking about Bakshi and his work here. He didn't make the film with the sole agenda of shocking his audience. He whipped it up to show what life was like, especially back in the swinging 60s. The movie is conclusively one of Bakshi's very best works, and if you also wish to seek the truth, then take out 80 minutes from your schedule and give this a definite shot. American Pop, 1981. This 1981 adult animated musical drama centers on the 4 generations of a Russian-Jewish refugee family of musicians whose professions align with the history of the American popular music in the 20th century. The narrative begins with a young immigrant Zammy arriving in New York City. He gets hooked to the show business, but an unfortunate accident ruins his voice and ends his singing career. He falls in love with a stripper, marries her, and has a son called Benny who eventually becomes a jazz pianist. Although Benny gets killed during the Second World War, his son Tony tastes success as a songwriter during the 60s, and so does Tony's son Pete, who actually becomes a star in the 80s. Boasting a 7.2 rating on IMDb, it would not be wrong to admit that with American Pop, Bakshi was literally the closest to perfection. His style of animation here shows how much he was ahead of his time. We are stressing on the intertwining of real footage and photos from before that brings a certain level of realism and makes it look so original. While the majority of the flick's animation was done via rotoscoping, the movie also made use of watercolors, computer graphics, some live-action shots, and archival footage. Bakshi, as the director and co-producer of the film, did his background research pretty well, and with the characters on display, he managed to achieve the essential goal that literally every cartoonist strives for. While you're watching the movie, you will actually find yourself relating to the characters, and what can possibly be better than that? It goes without saying that American Pop was a rather bold experiment, one that had quite an impressive end result, and for that we have Bakshi to thank. The underrated jewel here is for anyone who loves music, animation, and most importantly, Ralph Bakshi. Coonskin, 1975. This 1975 satirical crime film, often stated by Bakshi as his best film, revolves around an African-American brother rabbit, brother bear, and preacher fox who rise to the top level of the organized crime racket in Harlem, crossing their paths with corrupt law enforcement, scam artists, and the good old mafia, of course. Bakshi, as the director and writer of Coonskin, was smart enough to make this flick more like a live-action animation hybrid.
What am I supposed to expect to happen in here?
What's going on in here, man?
Always known as the one to do anything but ordinary, Bakshi comes up this transgressive flick with the sole purpose of mocking race-related typecasts. Besides being an excellent piece of brutal satire, the film is also a piercing commentary on a lot of prevalent prejudices that still exist today. Why else would Quentin Tarantino say serious treatment of this very fearless satirical artist is long overdue, while describing Bakshi's incendiary piece of work in the blaxploitation genre? The animation featured here is intentionally unpolished. The blend of animation and the real backdrops actually makes Coonskin look quite fascinating. Everything from the montages, the long takes, to the endlessly warped designs of the characters on display works in favor of this entertaining, thought-provoking flick. Highly recommending this movie to anyone who wishes to be a part of the permeating aerosphere of racism that Bakshi has tried to deconstruct via this flick.
Just a goddamn crazy nigga.
We's all niggas, boy. You and me, just goddamn.
Heavy Traffic, 1973. The jobless cartoonist Michael often draws inspiration from the harsh, gritty world surrounding him. Sharing his apartment with his constantly bickering parents, the Italian father and the Jewish mother, Michael is often derided and looked down upon by his friends. He is friends with Carol, a female black bartender who gives him free drinks in exchange for drawings of her annoying white manager. Michael eventually gets the chance to pitch a comic strip idea to an old movie executive, but the abnormally dark tone of his story results in the death of the mogul.
With Michael, we've been secretly tight for a long time.
Further complications arise when Michael's father, Angie, tries to make use of his mafia influences to put a killing contract on his son for apparently tarnishing the family's name by getting involved with a black woman. Hats off to Bakshi's 1973 Heavy Traffic, which is an animated feature that starts, ends, and occasionally combines with live action filmed on location. This visually stimulating comedy drama, written and directed by Bakshi, is widely recognized as his biggest critical success.
Your mother is a goddamn crazy bitch, Michael!
His rotoscoped animation gets an edge thanks to Ed Bogus and Ray Shanklin's musical score, stating that the movie is far more than just to be treated as a cartoon. We all know how unique his animation skills are, and the fact that he has intersected animation with real stills and the film sequences gives this flick here a whole new flavor. Also, the other reason why this film works is the sole fact that Bakshi has literally poured every element of his culture, rage, grief, and contentment into every frame of this movie. Do not miss out on the chance of giving this artistic satire a watch. Mind you, it's a complete blast.
Mama.
Hey Good Lookin, 1982. During the 1980s, a strong-built middle-aged woman encounters a mysterious man donning a trench coat and a fedora. He greets her and shows her what's left of a black leather jacket, and at the sight of the remains of the jacket, the woman bursts into tears. The man decides to tell her a story, taking her back to Brooklyn in the 50s. His story revolves around Vinny, the leader of the gang called the Stompers, his best friend Crazy Shapiro, Vinny's girlfriend Rosie and Eva, who not only happens to be Rosie's best friend, but is also the girlfriend of Crazy Shapiro.
But wouldn't it be easier if
I ate the French fries. French fries!
Although the original version of the film remains unreleased to this day, nothing could stop Bakshi's Hey Good Lookin' from having a massive cult following. Not many know this, but the movie was originally finished shooting featuring both live-action and animated characters. Only the 4 main leads were animated and the rest were live-action characters shot on live-action sets. This 1975 version, according to Warner Brothers, was unsatisfactory, or rather unbelievable, and certain references from Bakshi's 1975 Coonskin controversy were also cited. Bakshi was left with no other choice but to remove all the live-action footage. He even went to the extent of reanimating it and finally had the film officially released in 1982.
Yeah. Come on, chicken. Oh, really? Oh, yeah?
Thank God for the end result, as the movie categorically falls under the list of his best works. Bakshi's animation on display here is absolutely phenomenal. There's always something organic about his rotoscoped pieces, and with Hey Good Lookin', he takes it up notches higher with an entirely original musical score. Watch out for the climax, that's one of the high points of the whole movie. Highly recommending this, and if you are wondering where to give this a shot, just head to YouTube. This is all the time we had for today's episode. We hope you guys liked it. It would be awesome if you guys can take some time to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to tell us which topic you want us to cover in the comment section. Have a fantastic day ahead and stay safe.
The house over here, the studio over here, I'll still draw, of course. We'll raise children over here. I'll fight crime over there.